Now, interestingly, on the same day, President Trump tweeted a new policy banning transgenders from serving in any capacity in the United States military. His Department of Justice also filed a legal brief that argues the Civil Rights Act does not protect Americans who are discriminated against because of their sexual orientation. Justice Department lawyers filed the amicus brief as a part of a lawsuit filed by now deceased skydiving instructor Donald Zarda, who said he was fired for his sexual orientation. Zarda's lawyers contend his dismissal violated Title VII of the 1964 Landmark Act, which prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. The department's brief reads in part, "The sole question here is whether, as a matter of law, Title VII reaches sexual orientation discrimination. It does not, as has been settled for decades. Any effort to amend Title VII's scope should be directed to Congress rather than the courts. The central element of sex discrimination under Title VII is that employees of one sex must be treated worse than similarly situated employees of the other sex, and sexual orientation discrimination simply does not have that effect." Now, protesters were out in force against the transgender ban, and civil rights groups blasted the Justice Department's stance on the Civil Rights Act. James Essex, director of the ACLU's LGBT and HIV project, said in a statement, "Fortunately, courts will decide whether the Civil Rights Act protects LGBT people, not an attorney general, and a White House that are hell-bent on playing politics with people's lives. We are confident that the courts will side with equality and the people." Joining us in studio is Harper Gene. She is the Director of Policy for the National Center for Transgender Equality. Thank you so much for joining us. What is your reading on the Justice Department's filing of this brief?
Well, it's another step in a campaign against the civil rights of so many communities by this Justice Department. And it's contrary to what they say in the brief, it's really contrary to a couple decades of case law, increasingly saying that sex discrimination has to include anti-LGBT discrimination. If you're discriminated against, if you're fired, if I'm fired because my sex as a woman is the same sex as my partner, or because my sex as a woman is not, as a transgender woman, is not a sex that somebody else thinks I am, how is that not sex discrimination?
So one of the questions many people have had is, how come Congress hasn't already taken this up and been more explicit in identifying what the protections under the Civil Rights Act would be?
Have you seen Congress? I mean, the real answer is, Congress probably should at some point come out and codify the case law. But increasingly what the case law is saying, based on how the Supreme Court has said you're supposed to interpret civil rights laws, is that this is sex discrimination under existing law. That's what the courts should say, and that's what the Justice Department and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission have been saying up until now. The EEOC is independent of the administration. It's still holding that position.
The Justice Department filed this brief unsolicited. Are they looking for a fight here?
I think I'd have to say yes. When you look at their attacks on transgender students, on transgender troops, on voting rights, on efforts to hold police departments accountable, this is a Justice Department that, as my ACLU friend said, is really hell-bent on rolling back civil rights.
Let's bring back our panel for this conversation. Barbara Arnwire, I want to come with you. Why is the Justice Department taking up this fight if it's not anything other than just being hell-bent on rolling back civil rights?
Listen, the last 2 weeks have been about only one thing with this administration, and that is consolidating their base. That's all they want, and they want to give people red meat and hope that they just, scream and holler and eat it. But listen, the reality is that the courts have always been very good at interpreting Title VII. For example, disparate impact, which is, if something happens to you and people say it's not because of your race, but it's happening to everybody else who's because of your race, then that law was not written into the original Title VII. The courts established that precedence. And the courts have been establishing what's even race. Because some people were saying for years that, Jewish people was not, viewed as, racial discrimination. But then the court said, well, wait a minute, let's think about this. What really happens in practice? What's the reality? So I believe that the Justice Department here was just trying to play politics, the wrong politics, the exclusionary hate politics that has been characteristic of this administration. It is sad. I think what we saw with the transgender ban was absolutely ridiculous. And I think that the military itself has finally stood up and said, no, We won't do this until we're ordered to do it.
Faraji, President Trump's tweets, and it's a shame that we're describing the president making ideas and suggestions for a nation based on tweets, came on the 69th anniversary of President Truman desegregating the armed forces. Yeah. Is there any symbolism that President Trump is clearly missing here, or is that not relevant to this conversation?
I don't think it's relevant, but one of the generals in the armed forces said that until that particular policy about transgender is actually a formal directive, that they're going to continue to work based upon the current policy that's in place. I think that one of the big things, though, we have to keep in mind is that the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 was predominantly because of what was going on with black people at that time, okay? But there's this thing where this narrative between the gay rights struggle and the black struggle is intertwined. It's not intertwined. There is a very, very different type of struggle between what we see coming out of the LGBTQ community versus what we're seeing within the black community. That narrative should not be blended together. So I truly believe, Harper, and I agree, that there should be something else codified by Congress to make sure that the LGBTQ community is protected. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be protected under that civil rights law, because that was in 1964. The gay rights community's voice at that time wasn't the same as it was right now, and I don't think it's fair to try to jump on that.
I can't disagree more, because let's face it, the law covers sex, it covers color, it covers a national origin, it covers, quite a broad swath of communities that weren't just African American. By the way, African American people are LGBTQIA. We also have the same realities, and let's be very, no, we have the same. The narratives are not identical, I agree with that. The issues of discrimination aren't identical, but it's still discrimination.
I believe
and that is the purpose of that law. Yeah. That law, the purpose of Title VII, this is a law that I breathe and live. Its whole purpose is to equalize the realities of people in the workplace, and the only thing that should ever govern anything about your participation in the workplace is your performance, your qualifications, and your abilities. It shouldn't be about all of these superficial,
it's the intent in which the law was created. What was the reason at that time?
But when the court did Griggs versus Duke Power and expanded the whole base of Title VII and said that this law is not just about, quote, legalism, but it is about the spirit of the law, and interpreted that law and broadened it under the Griggs standard. That was, to me, the most important thing that happened ever in this legislative history. So I mean, this, I should say this legal history of this bill. Yeah. So I just think that you got to really look at that, because see, remember, I teach
there's a lot of content there where you can see about the intersectionality. 1 second, Harper, I want to have a last comment from you. Any particular thoughts that you want our viewers to come away from, particularly those who may want to stand in solidarity with the LGBTQ community?
Well, I certainly agree. Different communities that have struggled for civil rights have very different histories.
Right.
But we have common values as a nation, that we believe in fairness and equality. And we believe in interpreting our laws in a way that makes sense, that respects their purpose and their words. Right. That's what the courts have been doing here, and that's what the Justice Department is gratuitously trying to turn backwards. And I don't think they'll be successful, but they're sure going to try.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no. That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.